Maybe you are that person who keeps moving forward every day, working, solving problems, taking care of the people who depend on you, and still managing to smile when others look at you. But inside, there is a pressure no one sees, a kind of exhaustion you almost never talk about, the weight of responsibilities, worries, and thoughts that remain hidden in silence. Have you ever felt like you're carrying more than you should, and that almost no one realizes how difficult it has been for you? In this video, we're going to talk about exactly this invisible pressure that many people carry in adult life, especially when everyone expects you to be strong all the time. We'll explore why this emotional weight begins to accumulate, why it sometimes feels like you have to hold everything together on your own, and most importantly, what the Bible reveals about those moments when the heart feels tired, even when everything on the outside appears to be under control. If you've ever wondered whether God truly sees what you're facing in silence, if He notices the worries you don't tell anyone about, or if there is a better way to deal with this pressure inside you, then stay with me until the end of this video. Because what we're about to reflect on may bring clarity, relief, and a new way of understanding the weight you've been carrying. Before we continue, it's worth mentioning something important. This video was created with the help of artificial intelligence tools that assist in organizing ideas, deepening reflections, and making the content clearer and more accessible. But the message, the spiritual direction, and the principles we're going to explore here are firmly grounded in the Bible and in the real human experience of dealing with the pressures of life. Technology can help structure the content, but what truly matters in this video is the spiritual reflection it invites. Because when we talk about the invisible weight that many people carry, we're not just talking about an abstract idea. We're talking about the daily reality of millions of people who keep living, working, and carrying responsibilities. While inside, they deal with a constant pressure that almost no one notices. And that is exactly what we need to begin talking about now. Many people reach a moment in life when they begin to notice that something inside them feels different, not necessarily because a visible crisis has appeared, and not because something dramatically wrong has happened, but because little by little, the mind seems to be constantly occupied. There is always something to solve, something to think about, something to anticipate. When we are younger, life often feels lighter in many ways. There are challenges, decisions, and concerns, but usually the number of responsibilities is still smaller. Many choices are still being formed, and the emotional weight of decisions has not accumulated in the same way. But as the years pass, new layers of responsibility begin to appear. Work, career, financial stability, important decisions, caring for family, planning the future. All of these begin to occupy more and more space in the mind. And very often, this change happens almost imperceptibly. There is no specific moment when someone stops and clearly realizes, now my life has become much heavier. Most of the time, it is a gradual process. Responsibilities begin to accumulate, expectations increase, worries take up more space, and slowly, a silent emotional pressure begins to form. Even so, many people continue functioning normally. They continue waking up early, going to work, solving problems, taking care of their families, making decisions, and maintaining their daily routines. Externally, they appear strong, stable, and reliable. They are the people others trust, the ones who always seem to have control of the situation, the ones who seem able to handle life's difficulties. But there is a part of the story that almost no one sees. Inside, many of these people are dealing with a constant level of mental and emotional pressure. The mind rarely finds true moments of silence. Even during moments of rest, thoughts continue to appear. Concerns about the future, decisions that still need to be made, problems that still need to be solved. It's as if the mind is always a few steps ahead, trying to anticipate everything that might happen. Over time, this begins to create a different kind of exhaustion. Not just physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. That feeling that the mind never completely shuts down. The feeling that there is always something waiting for you. Something that needs your attention. And very often, people simply get used to living this way. They learn to keep moving forward even while carrying that internal weight. They learn to keep functioning, even when inside they are more tired than they would like to admit. The Bible recognizes that life is made up of different seasons and phases. In Ecclesiastes 3:1, we find a very clear statement. There is a time for everything and a season for every purpose under heaven. This passage reveals something important about the human journey. There are seasons of life when responsibilities naturally increase, seasons when decisions become more serious, commitments more complex, and expectations higher. Some seasons of life are naturally lighter. Others require more maturity, more discernment, and greater emotional strength. The problem is not necessarily going through these seasons. The real problem begins when a person enters these phases of life without realizing how much they are already carrying inside. Because when emotional weight accumulates over time, it can begin to affect the way a person thinks, feels, and responds to life. And often this happens silently, without others noticing, without the person themselves being able to fully explain what is happening. They simply feel that they are carrying more than before, more responsibilities, more worries, more pressure. And it is exactly at this point that one of the quietest dynamics of adult life begins to appear. Some people eventually become the support system for everyone around them. And when that happens, the invisible pressure can grow even more. There comes a moment in life when some people begin to notice something curious happening around them. Little by little, almost without realizing it, they start to occupy a very specific role in their relationships and responsibilities. They become the kind of person others turn to when they need help. They are the ones who solve problems when something goes wrong, the ones who stay calm when a situation becomes confusing, the ones who are able to see solutions when others feel lost. Over time, this attitude begins to build a quiet reputation. Family, friends, and even coworkers start to see this person as someone strong, reliable, and capable of handling difficult situations. When a problem appears, people look to them. When someone needs guidance, they turn to them. When an important decision needs to be made, they are often the ones asked for advice. At first, this may even feel positive. There is a sense of usefulness, of purpose, of knowing that you can help others in important moments of life. Being someone others trust can bring a sense of value, but there is a silent side to this dynamic that often goes unnoticed. The more a person becomes the support system for others, the less space they feel they have to express their own struggles. Because when everyone sees you as strong, few people imagine that you might also be tired. When everyone sees you as someone who solves problems, they rarely think that you might also be facing internal questions you still don't know how to resolve. A silent logic begins to form inside the mind. If everyone depends on me, then I must stay strong. If people trust me, then I cannot show weakness. If I am the one helping others, then who would help me? Little by little, this way of thinking begins to shape an emotional identity. The person begins to see themselves as someone who must handle everything, someone who must maintain control of situations, someone who must solve problems, sustain decisions, and keep stability even when circumstances become difficult. The problem is that this position can generate a silent emotional pressure, because those who support others often keep their own worries hidden. Those who give advice do not always feel they have someone with whom they can share their own doubts. Those who help everyone around them may begin to feel they have no space to talk about their own exhaustion. And so many internal battles remain hidden in silence, concerns that are never spoken, thoughts that remain only in the mind, pressures that continue to be carried every day. Externally, that person continues functioning normally. They continue helping, solving problems, and being seen as someone stable. But internally, the weight keeps accumulating little by little. The Bible brings an important principle about this dynamic of human life. In Galatians 6:2 it says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." This verse reveals something deeply significant. The spiritual life was never designed for a person to carry everything alone. God's plan always included the idea of sharing burdens, dividing weight, and supporting one another during difficult seasons of life. This means that even the people who are strong for others also need moments when they do not carry everything alone. They also need support. They also need prayer. They also need understanding. But often this truth gets lost in the middle of adult responsibilities. A person becomes used to continuing to carry everything, even when the weight has already become heavier than it should be. And when that happens, emotional pressure begins to grow in a way that almost no one around them notices. Externally, that person continues to be seen as strong. But internally, there is a level of weight that keeps accumulating silently. And this is exactly the kind of invisible pressure that many people carry every day, without almost anyone realizing it. Yet the Bible reveals something deeply comforting about this. Even when the people around you cannot see that weight, God sees what no one else notices. One of the most difficult things about the emotional pressure of adult life is that very often it simply isn't visible to anyone around you. People see what is on the outside. They see you working, fulfilling responsibilities, solving problems, and continuing to move forward. They see someone who appears balanced, someone who seems strong, someone who looks like they have control over their life. But there is a part of the story that rarely appears, because some of the most intense battles in life happen inside the mind and inside the heart. There are worries no one sees, thoughts that keep circling through the mind when the day comes to an end, moments when a person is silent, but inside they are trying to organize everything they need to resolve, anticipate, or face. Sometimes the day ends, the environment becomes quiet, and that is when the thoughts begin to appear more strongly. Concerns about the future, decisions that still need to be made, responsibilities that seem to never pause, and very often all of this happens without anyone around you realizing it. Maybe you have experienced moments exactly like this. Moments when you are surrounded by people, yet you feel that no one truly understands what is happening inside you. Moments when you continue smiling, talking, and carrying your responsibilities, even while holding a level of emotional pressure that almost no one can imagine. Externally, life keeps functioning, but internally, there is a constant effort to keep everything in balance. Sometimes a person even catches themselves asking a quiet question deep inside. Does anyone really understand what I'm going through? Does anyone realize how heavy this has been for me? This kind of question appears precisely because many of life's most intense pressures are not visible on the outside. They are not visible. They make no noise. They happen in silence. They happen inside the mind. They happen inside the heart. And when these pressures remain hidden for a long time, a person can begin to feel as if they are facing everything completely alone, as if the weight is resting only on their own shoulders. But the Bible reveals something deeply comforting about moments like this. In Psalm 56:8, we find a powerful declaration about the way God sees our struggles. The verse says, "You have kept count of my wanderings, put my tears in your bottle." This passage communicates a very powerful image. It shows that God does not observe only the major events of our lives. He does not see only what is visible to other people. He notices even what no one else can see. He sees the silent worries. He knows the nights when the mind cannot rest. He understands the tears that were never explained to anyone. What may seem invisible to others is never invisible to God. This means that even when you feel that no one fully understands the weight you have been carrying, God understands. Even when no one notices the emotional exhaustion inside you, God sees it. And this changes the way we can look at the pressures of life. Because when someone believes they are completely alone, the weight feels much heavier. But when a person begins to realize that God sees, understands, and cares about what they are facing, something begins to change inside the heart. The pressure may still exist. The responsibilities of adult life still remain part of the journey. But the feeling of carrying everything alone begins to decrease. And that creates space for a new way of dealing with that inner weight. Before we continue, if this reflection is helping you better understand what often happens inside your own mind and heart, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. Here we explore spiritual principles that help bring clarity to what is often happening inside a person's emotional and spiritual life. And in the next videos, we will continue exploring these reflections that strengthen faith, bring direction, and help us deal with the invisible pressures of life. Now, there is an important aspect we need to understand. Because when this invisible pressure remains for too long, it begins to directly affect the way the mind functions. And that is exactly what we are going to explore now. Let's endure. There comes a point when emotional pressure stops being something you feel only occasionally and begins to influence the way your mind functions every single day. At first, that weight may seem like a normal part of adult life. After all, everyone has responsibilities. Everyone faces challenges, decisions, and moments of concern. Thinking about the future, solving problems, and dealing with responsibilities is part of the human experience. But when these pressures remain inside the mind for too long, something gradually begins to change. Thoughts start appearing more frequently. The mind begins working constantly, trying to anticipate problems, imagine scenarios, and find solutions to situations that may not have even happened yet. It is as if the brain is always trying to keep everything under control. Even when the body tries to rest, the mind continues working. Many people know this feeling very well. You finish the day, lie down to rest, but the mind keeps functioning. Thoughts begin appearing one after another. Concerns about what needs to be solved tomorrow, work-related issues, family responsibilities, important decisions that still have no clear answer. And even when everything seems relatively stable on the outside, internally, there is a constant sense of alertness, as if the mind is always prepared to deal with whatever might happen. Over time, this way of functioning begins to produce emotional signs that often go unnoticed. Difficulty relaxing completely, the feeling that something is always pending, thoughts that return repeatedly, even when you try to focus on something else, and a type of exhaustion that is not only physical, it is mental exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, that feeling that the mind never fully shuts down. Even when a person tries to rest, there is still a part of them thinking, analyzing, calculating, and trying to organize everything. The Bible describes this human experience very directly in Proverbs 12:25. The verse says, "Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down." This statement reveals something deeply true about human nature. Anxiety does not always begin with a major crisis. Often it begins with a silent accumulation of internal pressures, small worries that begin to add up, responsibilities that increase, decisions that must be made, situations that demand constant attention. When all of this remains inside the mind for too long, the heart begins to feel the weight of it. And that is exactly what Proverbs describes. Anxiety may begin as concern, but over time it starts to weigh down the heart. The mind becomes more tired, the ability to find peace decreases, and even moments that should be peaceful begin to be filled with constant thoughts. The most important thing to understand here is that this does not mean there is something wrong with you. In fact, this is an extremely common response when someone carries many responsibilities and pressures for a long time. Responsible people tend to think a lot. Committed people tend to worry about what needs to be resolved. People who care deeply about others often carry more emotional weight than they realize. The problem is not feeling that weight. The problem begins when a person starts believing they must carry everything alone, when the mind assumes responsibility for controlling everything, when the heart tries to carry pressures that it was never meant to bear alone. Because when the human mind tries to sustain all the pressures of life without rest, without support, and without surrendering that weight to God, the heart begins to become overwhelmed. And it is exactly at this point that many people develop a silent belief, an idea that may seem logical, but can become extremely heavy. The belief that they must endure everything alone. The belief that they must always remain strong. The belief that asking for help is a sign of weakness. But it is exactly here that the message of Jesus presents something completely different. And that is what we need to talk about next. There is a silent belief that many people end up developing throughout adult life. It usually does not appear as a clear sentence inside the mind, but it deeply influences the way a person deals with responsibilities, decisions, and the pressures of everyday life. It is the idea that you have to handle everything on your own. This belief is rarely born out of pride. Most of the time, it is born out of responsibility. People who carry this mindset are usually committed people who care about what they do, people who care about the well-being of their family, their work, and the people around them. Maybe you have become this kind of person over the years. Someone who solves problems, someone who takes responsibility, someone who does not walk away from what needs to be done. Over time, this posture begins to shape the way you see yourself. You start to feel that you must remain strong. You must keep solving things. You must keep holding everything together, even when the weight begins to feel heavier than you would like to admit. There is also another factor that reinforces this silent mentality: the fear of disappointing others. When many people depend on you, an internal feeling can begin to appear, as if there is no space to fail, as if you must keep everything working, Continue being the person who organizes, solves, and sustains situations. And little by little, this pressure begins to generate a kind of internal expectation. The expectation that you must always handle everything, always have the answers, always keep everything under control. The problem is that this way of thinking creates an enormous emotional burden, because at some point in life, every human being reaches a limit. We all have moments when the mind becomes tired, moments when the heart needs rest, moments when there simply is no more emotional energy to keep carrying everything alone. But many people try to ignore these limits. They keep moving forward, even when they are already exhausted inside. They keep taking responsibility, even when the heart is already overwhelmed. And it is exactly at this point that the message of Jesus becomes deeply meaningful. In Matthew 11:28, we find one of the most well-known and powerful invitations in the entire Bible. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Notice something very important in this statement. Jesus does not call only those who are strong. He does not call only those who appear to have everything under control. He calls precisely those who are tired, those who are overwhelmed, those who feel that the weight of life has become too heavy to keep carrying alone. This invitation reveals something fundamental about the way God sees our journey. God never expected you to be invincible. He never expected you to have the strength to sustain all the pressures of life by yourself. Faith was never about proving how strong we are. Faith is about recognizing when we need help. It is the moment when a person understands that they do not have to hide their exhaustion from God. It is the moment when the heart finds a safe place to release what has been weighing on it for so long. And when someone begins to understand this truth, something important begins to change inside the mind. The person realizes they do not have to sustain everything alone. They continue living their responsibilities. They continue working. They continue caring for their family. They continue facing the challenges of life. But now there is a place to bring the weight that once existed only inside their mind, a place to bring their worries, a place to release emotional exhaustion. And this is exactly what begins to transform the way we deal with the pressures of life. Because when the heart learns to surrender its burdens to God, something begins to change inside us. The mind begins to find more rest. The heart begins to breathe more lightly. And the person discovers that they do not have to walk alone. And that is exactly the inner transformation we need to talk about now. Because when someone learns to release the weight they carry, a new way of living begins to appear. Here, there is something very important that many people take time to understand about faith. Surrendering your burdens to God does not mean abandoning the responsibilities of life. It does not mean escaping challenges. It does not mean ignoring problems or pretending that pressures do not exist. Life continues. Decisions continue. Responsibilities remain part of the journey. But when someone learns to surrender their inner weight to God, something begins to change deeply within the heart. The difference is not necessarily in external circumstances. Many times the situations remain exactly the same. Work still demands attention. Family still needs care. Decisions still require wisdom. But the difference begins inside the mind, because there is a great difference between carrying responsibilities and carrying anxiety. Responsibilities are part of life. They give direction, purpose, and structure to what we do. But anxiety appears when the mind begins to believe it must control everything. When a person begins to feel that everything depends entirely on them. Many people live exactly this way. They try to predict every problem before it happens. They try to imagine every possible scenario. They try to make sure nothing goes wrong. And when something slips out of control, the heart immediately feels the weight of that pressure. This way of living creates a constant tension inside the mind. A person feels they must sustain everything, anticipate everything, solve everything. And little by little, the heart becomes tired of this constant attempt to control everything. But the Bible presents a completely different perspective. In 1 Peter 5:7, we find a very clear instruction. The verse says, "Cast all your anxiety on Him, because He cares for you." This passage reveals something deeply liberating. God never asked you to carry the anxiety of life alone. He never asked you to sustain every worry inside your own mind. He invites you to surrender it to Him. Notice that the text does not simply say to trust. It uses a very active expression, cast it on Him. This means transferring the weight. It means placing what is inside your mind into God's hands. It is like someone finally placing on the ground a load they have been carrying for a long time. For a long time, that load seemed unavoidable. It felt like it had to be carried all the time. But once it is placed on the ground, the body immediately feels the difference. The weight is no longer on the shoulders. Now it is somewhere else. This is exactly the spiritual image the Bible presents. When you surrender your anxieties to God, the weight is no longer only on you. Now it is in God's hands. This does not mean the challenges of life disappear immediately. Responsibilities remain. Work continues. Decisions are still part of the journey, but the heart begins to function differently. A person no longer feels they must sustain everything alone. They begin to realize that God is present in the journey, that He sees the situations, that He understands the pressures, that He cares even about what seems outside our control. This awareness deeply changes the way the mind reacts to life's pressures. Anxiety begins to decrease. The mind finds more space to rest. The heart learns that it can trust God even when not every answer is clear. Faith begins to bring something many people spend years trying to find on their own, a kind of inner rest. Not a rest based on the absence of problems, but a rest based on trust. The trust that you are not carrying everything alone. The trust that God sees what you are facing, and the trust that He continues working even when you cannot yet see all the answers. And when this truth becomes real inside the heart, the way a person lives begins to change. Responsibilities remain, but the emotional weight is no longer the same. The heart learns to walk more lightly. The mind finds more space to breathe, and the person begins to realize they do not have to face life carrying everything alone. And it is exactly this change of perspective that opens the way for the conclusion of this reflection. Because when you realize that God sees what no one else sees, and that He cares about what you are carrying, something very important begins to happen inside the soul. Many people who appear strong on the outside are fighting silent battles on the inside. They keep working. They keep taking care of their responsibilities. They keep helping other people. They keep making important decisions every single day. Externally, they seem stable, reliable, and capable of handling almost any situation. But deep inside their hearts, there is a weight that almost no one notices. There is a level of emotional pressure that is rarely shared, worries that remain hidden in silence, thoughts that keep returning to the mind when the day comes to an end, responsibilities that seem to never decrease. Maybe you're exactly one of those people. Maybe you have grown used to moving forward every day, even when you feel like you are carrying more than you would like. Maybe you have become the person who solves problems, helps others, and keeps everything running. And little by little, almost without noticing, the weight of responsibilities has been accumulating inside your mind. Maybe there are worries you have never told anyone about. Maybe there are decisions you feel you must face alone. Maybe there are nights when your mind keeps thinking, trying to organize everything that still needs to be resolved. And even so, the next day you keep moving forward. You continue fulfilling your responsibilities. You continue doing what needs to be done. But there is something extremely important that the Bible reminds us of. God sees what no one else sees. He sees the worries you keep in silence. He understands the weight of the decisions you have to make. He knows the exhaustion that sometimes appears inside your mind. He understands the moments when your heart feels like it is carrying more than it should. None of this goes unnoticed by Him. What may seem invisible to others is never invisible to God. This means you have never truly been alone on this journey. Even in moments when it felt like you had to carry everything by yourself, God was still seeing every detail of your struggle. He sees when you try to remain strong. He sees when you fight to keep everything in balance. He sees when you feel like you have to handle everything. And maybe today is an important moment to remember something simple, yet deeply transformative. You do not have to keep carrying everything alone. You can continue being responsible. You can continue taking care of the things that are part of your life. You can continue facing the challenges that are part of your journey. But the emotional weight inside your heart does not have to remain only with you. There is a place where you can release that weight. There is a place where exhaustion finds rest. There is a place where worries can be placed into God's hands. And often it begins with something simple. A sincere prayer, a quiet moment before God, a moment when you decide to speak to Him about something you may have never shared with anyone. It doesn't have to be a perfect prayer. It doesn't have to be made of elaborate words. Sometimes it is enough to simply say what is truly in your heart, because God already knows what you are facing, and when that weight is placed in His hands, something begins to change inside us. The mind begins to find more peace, the heart begins to feel lighter, and a person begins to realize they no longer have to face everything alone. If this message spoke to you, maybe this is a good moment to pause for a few seconds and reflect. What have you been carrying in silence? What worries have been occupying your mind lately? Maybe today is the day to place that weight into God's hands. Before we finish, if this kind of reflection has helped you better understand what is happening inside your emotional and spiritual life, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we continue exploring biblical principles that bring clarity, direction, and hope to the challenges of life. And if you know someone who has also been carrying many responsibilities in silence, maybe sharing this video with them could bring exactly the reflection they need today. Because many times the greatest transformation begins when someone finally realizes a simple truth. God sees the weight you have been carrying, and He deeply cares about what is in your heart.